Okay, and Gavin's going to present an MO walkthrough. Gavin, take it away, please.
How are we all doing? So yeah, I just have it'll probably be reasonably short one today. I haven't been working on anything particularly big. It's usually small kind of bug fixes, but I just thought I'd talk about the templating contributor, like an issue I was working on, helping a contributor add a project template. So why don't I share a portion of my screen? I can remember how to do that. So I was kind of asked by Sean to help out a user. I think some of you may have gotten involved with this as well. A user called EasyBright, a contributor who wanted to add a project template for this PHP framework called Laravel, which I don't really have any experience with whatsoever. So it had been floating around, this idea of adding a project template for Laravel for quite some time. This issue was originally created 2 years ago, and by a different contributor altogether. And this guy EasyBright picked it up. So he had created a project here with some, what I would assume is, boilerplate code to get a project up and running in this framework, and also some GitLab YAML files for some pipelines, I think, as well. So pretty simple stuff, kind of, one would assume, pretty vanilla type situation for a contributor to add a project template for us. So I guess a good opportunity to see how well that is working. And it was one of the kind of first things that I was asked to kind of help out a contributor on as well. So when we got involved, Sean had sent him this kind of README for contributing to project templates. And I guess the meat of this talk is kind of just discussing the difficulties that were evident in that user following this README. And maybe, I guess, a takeaway for me, having helped him, was, perhaps this is something we can either update and add, a little bit more onto and add a bit more context to, and or whether that is something that we do plan to do in the future, or how we plan to tackle that. So I'll just bring you through some of the issues that he had originally. So when he was directed toward this handbook page, he didn't really understand, or he doesn't really have much experience with the GitLab development kit whatsoever. So, the first thing was to try and get him up and running with GDK, and have him change this setting and to confirm that it was working correctly before he could even begin the process. So I guess explaining that context to him, I wonder, would it be feasible for us to add a little blob to that here as well, so that he kind of knows what he's getting into when he begins this. And then when he began to progress through all the different stages of this, like when he gets into the meat of progressing through the detail here, there was a number of people, so he and a number of people who had tried to help him were getting a persistent error when running this rake task. I'm not too sure, but I think it may be related to the prefect setting here. But I could recreate the error locally, but what I found was it was intermittent. So when I went to debug it, I was kind of just repeatedly running it. And although it did usually fail, there were instances where it succeeded. And essentially what that does is it takes the rake task, kind of looks at the public repository which the user has provided, and it clones a copy of it. So I think it just downloads the repo locally or clones it locally, and then it pushes it to the GDK and creates an archive of it. And that archive then gets downloaded as some sort of gzip sort of archive, I think. And the goal is then to add that back into an MR like this as a binary here. So that was a little bit of a blocker for the user, trying to navigate that. So unfortunately, I haven't been able to share my screen, but only the window. But what I would like to do is flesh out that reg task a little bit more, so is that if a user needs to debug that locally, you know, add a few more comments into that to really explain what's happening there. And I guess just kind of blow open the magic of this a little bit, so as that it's easier for people to require less assistance from us when doing this. And then following on from that, so that took quite a while to get over this hump, to get the user up in GDK, to get over this hump into script. And then following on from that, another GitLab member took up the MOR, Alexander Turnsky here. So what I did is I ran it locally, and I pushed the tar file here, and he created the rest of the MOR. At which point, you know, the MOR looked pretty good. I thought it was a pretty good shape. And then Sean and I and the reviewer were kind of in a discussion about what sort of security checks can we perform on this, because obviously I have no real experience with this Laravel project. And it's not, while it's not huge, I mean, there's not a huge number of files in it, as you can see. You know, I guess we don't really have any process, or certainly didn't have an exact process in place, so as that we could verify that this is in fact not malicious in some way. So we reached out to Costel Maxim. I believe it was Costel, wasn't it?
Costel,
and
yeah.
Just asked him for some guidance on how we should approach making sure that we're not creating a vulnerability for ourselves here. So he kind of came back with 3 recommendations. So firstly, for me to fork it into a repo, my own repo. I guess that's because I have GitLab Premium, and I can add scanning to GitLab CI YAML file, and like you can run a pipeline on it to scan the contents of the files. So that's what I've done, and I have a pipeline open here, and I've run that. Now, that's not something that I'm hugely familiar with, and it's probably something I need to get my knowledge up on, is, you know, what scans to run, what we should be looking for specifically for something like PHP framework. Or is there sort of blanket scans that we can run that, you know, are sufficient? So I've asked him for some advice on that. So, you know, all going well, we can move on from this, and we can improve the merge request, and that's it. I think we're pretty much at the end of the process now, if Costel's happy with the scan. But I'm wondering, should we now revert back to our contributor guidelines for project templates and kind of flesh them out a bit more, and add a little bit more of a summary at the top of like the steps involved? Because I kind of feel like you get dumped into, you know, quite detailed steps here, and if one of them goes wrong, you're not really sure of the context that you're currently stuck in to help yourself get out of it, I think. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. I know that's not a particularly long talk. I can talk about another bug, which is probably a little bit less interesting, but I wonder, did the team have any sort of thoughts on whether we should, or whether I should spend some time fleshing this out a little bit or not?
Personally, I think our approach to this is actually a little bit wrong. I think requiring contributors to get GDK up and running just so they can edit a template in a different language is, you know, it's a slightly counterintuitive approach. Like, they shouldn't be required to learn Ruby, you know, to submit a PHP template. I think really what we should be doing is looking at how we can solve that issue in a different way. So we already have this project, this group that holds all of those project templates, and I think we've discussed this briefly before, where instead of asking them to submit the templates via GDK, they could directly submit it to the project within the project templates group, And then all of those scans could be configured in the CI pipelines there. And then we could create a automation that, every time there's a new update, then we port it back to GDK.
Yeah, like I think that's possibly one of the reasons why I'm kind of asking whether I should work on this whatsoever, because I know there was, a discussion around whether this was something that we needed to kind of fundamentally overhaul or not.
Yeah, I think that will be quite a substantial change and probably will take quite a while to implement. So yeah, I think
Joe, I'm sorry, I'm liking the way you're thinking. But what are you saying, that we give the, maybe I'm mishearing what you're saying, but are you saying that we create a project and then the user can do an MR against that project directly in the project templates?
Yeah,
that sounds like a great solution.
I feel like that makes more sense, because then they only have to use their own language, right? If they're writing a PHP library, they only need to understand PHP. We can configure CI pipelines for each of those projects that scan for security issues, and then anytime a new merge request is created against the default branch and it's merged in, we can create an automation that takes all those changes, generates a new tar file, and inserts that into the GDK, so that self-hosted can use those templates.
I think one thing I've always been a little bit confused about with the templates is I'm guessing people actually use them, but I've never personally used them, because, for example, if you took the Rails one, it's effectively just going into a directory and typing Rails new.
Yeah.
So there's the other aspects of that I've always wondered is, why don't we just have some sort of option that automatically generates it through a CI script when you want to generate a project? So rather than having any fixed templates whatsoever, we have some way that potentially a repository could be created as the final product of like a CI task. So someone says, I want to make a new Rails project. It runs a CI job that runs Rails new, makes a repository, and then creates that on the GitLab server. And then that's the template. And it would give us a lot of flexibility, because it would effectively be just the CI tasks instead of having commit histories and all this sort of stuff. And it would just be using the built-in generators. But I don't know why we didn't do that, if that makes sense.
I think that's actually absolutely where we need to go to. And I've even created an issue for that. Because each of these, I don't know Laravel, but Pat has mentioned that. So, each of these frameworks actually they typically have their own way of having templates. And so Rails has a template file. And I guess the issue that I think you touched on, Robert, is, if you use these templates, they're already old anyway. They're already, it's the gems are old versions, and everything is basically old. But even more importantly, the other point you made is people do seem to use these for some reason. They're very popular, and we get a lot of MRs, and most of the MRs are things like bumping versions, which, so we want to be doing that for a number of reasons. But so I would love to see us go to some way of supporting each framework's templating language, which will be, of course, different in everyone. It's probably going to be file driven. So that's probably going to be a common feature. And then maybe we could branch out based on the language progressively.
I think the thing I mentioned where you could potentially do it through a CI would effectively make all of the other problems go away. Nobody would have to install the GDK. Nobody would have to even learn anything. And it could be completely custom for everybody, that we wouldn't have to hold anything centrally. I mean, we could have some centrally held scripts or something. The only thing we'd need to do is to have some sort of way of running CI jobs in GitLab that just aren't tied to a project, or like maybe creating a blank project that And maybe that'd be the way you do it. You'd create a blank project with the CI template, and then the CI file in that project updates itself.
Sounds great.
But that would get rid of so many of the problems with this. And I mean, we could probably delete most things. It's because, I mean, looking at those steps, I've never actually seen those steps for contributing the templates before.
Oh yeah, it's a nightmare.
That's crazy.
And
maybe-
they were recently worked on. They're an improved version.
Yeah, sorry, I don't mean to be disparaging towards anybody who's worked on that, by the way.
That's
It's
insane.
fine.
Well, I think it's really interesting that customers, even despite all that, are still submitting new templates.
I think
Yeah, perhaps that's
it's-
something I can do, is reach out to Alexander and the other contributor here, perhaps just ask, like, you know, or at least Alexander, he wanted this Laravel and he picked up the challenge of getting it in. Just ask, well, what's the advantage of using this rather than using the template that comes with the framework? Like, there must be a reason why he's using it rather than.
So there's
Because you can do project new
yeah.
inside of GitLab, and then it uses the template. That's the feature.
The thing that I always does anyone else remember that Rails has this template thing where you can make a Rails application template that builds custom Rails applications when
Yeah.
you do Rails new?
Yeah, absolutely. So I linked it in the meeting minutes,
Yeah.
and then so it's basically a file, right? And you say what gems you're going to have, etc.
Yeah.
And so we'd have to read it. That's what I guess that's what I'm trying to say is each framework would treat it differently, but they probably are all file based, the different solutions.
So I've done that Rails one before, and even that I found went out of date really quickly. Like you'd have to constantly be updating your own template, and it's just easier to to run Rails new and adjust it yourself than update your template. But if we did it with CI files, the cool thing is that you can do literally anything in it. You could fix the versions in the top of the CI file. If anyone wants to go through CI files, I've worked with them quite a lot. Obviously not as much as the CI team, but I've got a few really interesting builds and repositories that use them. And we could potentially do something quite neat around it. The main trick is getting it to push it back to its own repository, if that makes sense. But it could be a reasonable option that might be possible with very few code changes.
Can I also, I've done a bit of discovery on this, and something else that was a bit of a mystery to me. I think Vasily actually worked this out, who's not on the call, but so there is the project templates project under GitLab that only exists on gitlab.com. So self-hosted don't have it. And then what happens is, for some reason, we vendor the projects, including that, you know, and that made me a little bit nervous because it's who knows what's in those vendored, you know, zips. So theoretically, the you know, we sell the security scanning tools, so theoretically that should be the solution. But as long as we scan it, and that's what our Costel has said that we should do, so that's I guess that's probably okay. But for the self-hosted, they actually do an API call. I went and found the code once. They do an API call, and they pick up from GitLab. They call back to GitLab.com, and they pick up the project templates and they create them in a local project. It's the most roundabout way of doing things I've ever seen.
That sounds quite strange. I didn't know any of this with this. I mean, I've looked at these templates before, but I normally got given the ones like, was it something to do with Azure last time, or some projects? It's like, I have no idea. And I think we're going to run into it more. I mean, I do know of Laravel because I actually, before I did a lot of Ruby, I did a lot of PHP. Sadly,
So you're the expert.
I'm a decade out of date now, though. That's the problem. If it's PHP 6 you want, I can maybe stretch to 6, but like 3 to 5 is what I actually know. But yeah, I mean, we can't possibly know about all of these projects and all the security side of it.
Right.
It seems a bit of a problem. Whereas if we did swap the way we worked it, we could tie the security scanner tasks into the repositories that are built and stuff as well. But it would involve it's a big change. Like it would completely change the way that we build these.
Is there also an intermediate step? And I'm just thinking about what Joe said earlier. So instead of that big long script that we've got, for example, so there's two types of contributions made. One is, and this is the most common one, so they want a bumper version, probably because it's out of date. So that's simple. They just do a merge request. It runs the pipeline, fine. But then when they actually want to contribute a new template, that's when it's more difficult, and they've got those long instructions. Could a different way of doing that be they open an issue saying, I want to contribute, I don't know, Helm, whatever we don't have. A GitLab team member then creates an empty project with the CI file in it, which will, with the scanner in it, we can just use it, standard file. And then they submit a merge request against that basically empty project. And then the whole thing has to run through the CI. And do we just miss all those steps? I guess the part I don't understand is, why do we vendor the assets and everything? Like, why do we bother doing that? I guess that question's a bit unclear.
My understanding was that you mentioned before that self-hosted does an API query. I think there's a case where they can't actually connect to GitLab.com, and in that case they use the vendored templates.
Well, I mean, that could be part of the CI job as well, the vendoring.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, well, this is quite interesting, because I got to say, this is a bit of a pet peeve for me, because when I first came on, there was tons of these, and I decided to not, to these MRs, right, to not bother the engineers with them, and I was just merging them myself. And after a while, I'm like, okay, yeah, we need to get this to the team. But there's just a number of inefficiencies in the process. But again, despite all that, people are using these and they want to use them. And we don't have numbers on how much they're actually using them, but just judging by all the MRs, they're clearly useful for someone.
So on our so who's actually played with the CI files so far? A few of you. So if you want to use the security pipelines and things, you import at the top of your CI YAML file, you put include the DAST one, and it does the DAST scans and things, and it adds extra pipelines and does that. They're stored, those files are stored in in the repository as these sort of YAML file jobs that are stored in there you go, yeah. So these are stored somewhere in the GitLab repository, or in the main application, and anyone can import them into their jobs. But what if we instead had a folder that was templates, and then you have a different template file for each application type? Because then in order for people to do a merge request for them, they literally just have to do a merge request with a YAML file. And they don't even have to do things like set up the GDK, because you can test it entirely in the CI. In the CI, you're just submitting a new YAML file until it works. And that would chop out the entire process effectively. And also we don't have the risk of people sneaking assets in, because you're literally reading the instructions about what is actually going to happen, and they're fetched from the official sources and all that sort of stuff. You don't really have to worry about that then.
Sounds good.
We could do a proof of concept of it without too much hassle. I mean, I'm always happy to, or if someone else wants to do it and I'll help them out, write a template that does a Rails new, and we do it as an example, and then how it could commit it back to the repository. And if that works, we can obviously just test it out in a blank project. You just put that file up, run it. If it works, cool. And then we could look at expanding it from there.
That sounds great. Would anyone like to create an issue? And I'll see if I can get it in the next 2 milestones.
I mean, I
Be an
wouldn't
issue for the proof of concept.
Well, yeah, I mean, with any of these ideas, I think they're all good actually. I think that I think the way it works now isn't great, and if we can do some exploration on a proof of concept, if anyone wants to do it, and
I mean, I'm always happy to do it, but I would just as happily help someone else learn how to do it with the CI stuff, because I've written quite a few that do really horrible and weird things. So I'm always quite happy to help with those if anyone wants to do that.
well,
I'd be interested in learning a bit more about that CI stuff, Robert, if you had some time. I could help with Jay on that.
could we use this issue that I've created, replace this repo with a Rails template, and just expand on that?
Have you got a link to that one?
It's in the chat. It's on screen. Yep.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, it might make sense to make a new one, because we would not be using that Rails template system. I mean, we could use the Rails template system, but I think the MVP would be to just
A vanilla Rails new.
yeah, just do a vanilla Rails new, because then you could always provide configuration options later.
Yeah,
potentially.
I think they can go on the command line as well. Actually,
Yeah,
then they can become CI variables.
yeah. I mean, we could you could do like variations on it and things as well. But you could, yeah. I mean, if you're doing it as a CI thing, you can do CI variables, so people could set them in their projects and they would run it that way. Or even potentially allow them to change the command that's running it or something like that. But yeah, I mean, so yeah, it might make sense to have a new issue, but tie it to that one and say something like that.
Okay, great. Well, Gavin, that was quite interesting, quite different from our normal ones. I'll stop the recording. I guess I don't know if we're going to post this one.